With CS5, creating 3D text has never been easier thanks to a brand new tool called Repoussé. Now I'm starting here with my image 3D text on screen, and you can open that inside the Chapter 9 folder. I've got my image here in full screen mode with menu bar. You can do the same if you'd like. And what we're going to do is turn this plain ordinary text into 3D text like that. I'm going to show you how to do that step by step. The first thing we want to do is have our text layer selected. With that selected, we want to go up to our window menu and choose 3D. That brings up our 3D panel here. And under Create New 3D Object, we've got our source set to selected layer. That is our Angeles text layer here. And what we want to select is the radio button for 3D Repoussé object, and simply hit Create. Now we get a warning that the text layer is going to be rasterized, so before you perform this step, make sure that you have the right typeface, the right color for your font, and we'll turn on Don't Show again and simply hit Yes. Now we've got the Repoussé dialog box up. Now let's clear some space here so that we can see the image, because this is where it really gets fun. Photoshop ships with a number of preset shapes here, and I'll just simply click on some and you can see what it's going to do to the text down here. Now this does take some processing power, so it may take your computer a few moments to catch up, but you can see that just with the click of a mouse you can get some very interesting shapes here. I'll click on this one here so you can see something drastically different. There we go, that's pretty cool. So we've got a lot of presets here. Now what these presets are doing is adjusting all of these settings here. We're going to go back to the basic default setting because we're going to add some of our own. Now you can see there are a ton of settings here. What I'm going to concentrate on is just a very small number of them to create this effect that we want. What we're going to do is to create the illusion that someone has actually created and placed physical blocks of text on the grounds here of Exposition Park, sort of our virtual public arts project, as if someone had designed some cubes and placed them on the ground. So to do that, we're going to work in this extrude menu, and for the depth, which is how far the extrusion extends beyond the front face of this object, we're going to go down here, bring this down somewhere about there. It looks pretty good, because we don't want a big extrusion here. We want something that looks pretty believable. Actually, that might be a bit too far. Let's come back out a couple of points. Right there looks pretty good. What we're going to do next is adjust the X and Y angles here, but we're going to choose shear. We don't want to bend the shape. We want to sort of shear these. And for the X angle, we're going to go up just a couple of points, and if you'll notice, that's shifting the extrusion to the right. For the Y angle, we're actually going to come down a bit. Just about 2 or 3 points, and that's shifting the extrusion down here. Now that looks pretty good. Before we leave this dialog box, however, I want to point out a couple of things. We could choose materials, and we have access to all of the materials that we have loaded up here into Photoshop. Now in this instance, I'm going to leave the default material that came up when we rasterized the text. I don't want anything too fancy here. This is a very subtle effect we're going for. We could adjust bevels, lots of other options here, but again, we're going for a very low-key approach, so we're going to leave those alone. One thing that we are going to do, however, we have 2 text layers, one for the word Angeles and one for Los, so we don't want to have to recreate this work from scratch. We didn't change too many settings here, but you can imagine that if we had changed a lot, we don't want to have to remember that or write it down. So what we're going to do is go and choose New Repoussé Preset. We're going to give it a name. Let's just call this Angeles. We hit OK. And we have our new preset saved down here. That's going to come in very handy in a few moments. So I'm going to hit OK. And now what we need to do, let me slide this out of the way, is to position this text so it's in a much more believable position here. To do that, we are going to select the camera tool, N is the keyboard shortcut for that, and I'm going to turn on ground plane here. Now this again is going to be a great illustration of the difference between the camera tool and the object tool. Watch what happens if I simply move this camera tool around. I've got my pan tool selected here. Notice that the object is moving and the ground plane. Now this red line here and green line simulates the ground, and that's going to be important because we're actually going to add a shadow. So we want our object to be resting right on the ground. If I choose the object tool and go and select the pan tool for that, watch what happens. I'm moving the object, but I'm moving it off of the ground. The ground is remaining stationary, but the object is moving. So again, a big difference between using the object tool and the camera tool. I'm going to undo that to take us back to where we were originally, and I'm going back to the camera tool, and I'm simply going to adjust this and get the angle right here. Let's move this back a little bit, and I'm going to choose this rotate tool, and we're just looking to get the ground plane here to match up nicely with the actual perspective of the image. If your image background is disappearing whenever you make adjustments with the ground plane view active, what I want you to do is go up to the 3D menu and turn off the feature Auto Hide Layers for Performance. Make sure that does not have a check mark next to it. Now 3D takes a bit of processing power, so turning this option on can speed things up a bit on an older computer, but without seeing the image behind your ground plane, it's going to be next to impossible to line things up in a believable manner. So again, we're just going to tweak this here. That's looking pretty good. And let's go down a bit in size. I'm just going to scale this view down just a hair. There we go. That looks pretty good. I'm going to turn the ground plane view off here. Now we've got our blocks of text here laying on the ground. Notice that the preview here of our 3D text is pretty rough, and that's because we haven't done any rendering. We're working with the interactive mode here under quality. Now this is the quality setting you want to choose when you're manipulating objects and moving them around, but if you want to get a preview of your shadows, how those things are working, then you want to set this to ray trace, either draft or final. For the sake of time, I'm going to choose draft, and now Photoshop is actually going to render this object. The edges are going to become nice and smooth, and you'll start to see your shadows in here. So again, you can see a much nicer rendering of the image in here. I'm going to turn this back off because there are a couple of things that I want to adjust here. I'm going to bring the size down a bit more. So with my scale tool selected here, I'm simply going to bring this down in size. And then with my pan tool, I'm going to bring this back down along here. And I think we'll just rotate it just a bit more. And we'll adjust here. That looks good. And again, I'm just trying to get this lined up nicely. What I want to do now is go to the lights portion of this 3D panel and notice that I have 3 infinite lights. What I want to do is soften up my shadows. So for each of these lights, I'm simply going to drag my softness up pretty high, somewhere around 88%. I'll do the same for this light. And once more for this third light. I want very soft shadows here falling on the letters. We're going to have a separate shadow that falls on the ground. And I'll show you how to do that. Now what we want to do is set our quality back to Ray Trace Draft. because now we're going to add a ground shadow. This is a great new feature called Ground Plane Shadow Catcher, and when I select this, now I get a warning saying that I must have a ray trace render quality setting selected. I do have that, so I'm going to tell Photoshop to never show this warning box again, and I'm going to hit OK. And now we're going to get another render. And there you can see we've got nice shadows here falling behind the letters the way the other shadows in the image are. Now what we need to do is take this second text layer and do a similar adjustment. Now one thing I will do before I rasterize this and use Repoussé is I am going to select my type tool. T is the shortcut for the type tool, and I'm going to reduce the size of the text here. It's a little big for what we want to go for. So I'm simply going to drag this down, and I'm holding the shift key because I don't want to skew it. Right about there looks pretty good. I'll hit the enter key to commit. Now what I can do, again in my 3D panel with 3D Repoussé object selected, I'm going to press create. And again we have our Repoussé dialog box. Now here's where we save some time. If I scroll down to the bottom of this list, I have the preset Angeles that I made. So I'm going to apply the same extrusion settings to this block of text as I did before. So that saves me a lot of time. I'm going to hit OK. And now I want to take advantage of all the time that I spent carefully positioning this Angeles block of text. If I select my camera view tool by pressing N, and I want to verify that this top text layer is selected, notice that in this view menu we have some defaults. We can go straight on, front, back, top, but look down here. We have these settings automatically saved for us for Angeles. So I'm simply going to select this, and that gives me identical settings in terms of perspective for Lost that I used on the previous 3D layer. So now all I have to do is select my pan tool here and just simply lay this down nicely on top. I'm going to leave this hanging just off the edge to give it a bit more of an organic look. And again for this I'm going to turn on Ray Trace Draft. And finally I'm going up to the 3D menu and I'm going to choose Ground Plane Shadow Catcher. And let me move this out of the way. We can take a look at the final image, and there we go. We've got our nice little public arts project on the grounds of Exposition Park in Los Angeles.